My formal name is William Walter Doar Jr., of course, name for my father. I'm known as Bill Doar. My father always said if you spelt your name D-O-A-R, we were related. And of course the Doars kind of came from the low country of South Carolina. McClellanville really was one of the areas that they came from. I was born in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which was my mother's home. They were actually living here in Georgetown, but she went home to have both my sister Amaryllis and myself, and I was born on March the 9th, 1935. So come March the 9th, I'll be 79 years old, and it's hard to know where all the time went. He was William Walter Doar, and of course he became senior, and he was born here in Georgetown, I think he's buried here in the Prince George graveyard, as is my mother. I think he was born in 1902, if my memory serves me correct. My mother was Julia Pogue, P-O-A-G, and she was from Rock Hill, South Carolina, and as I say, she went home to have both her two children. She's buried here, and I think she was born in 1903. Amaryllis, and she is now living in Cheraw, South Carolina. She married Cheraw native, and they living happily there in Cheraw. Going to Sunday school, my mother was a Sunday school teacher, as was Gerald Boyd. In fact, Gerald Boyd used to play the piano. She was the pianist in the Sunday school, and we met over here in the parish house. This building has a unique history. It was actually the Georgetown County Jail. And I can remember as a child, we'd park out here on High Market Street and get out of the car, and there would be, I guess, drunks who had sobered up overnight, and they were hollering out of the third store saying, "I want a lawyer, I want a lawyer," you know, and my mother was kind of embarrassed with that. But anyway, it was a long time before, you know, the church was able to acquire this building, which then, after that, became a library. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, then Prince George was able to, so my first memories of it were going to Sunday school and to church some. Of course, I'll have to admit I probably didn't go to church every Sunday, but I went to Sunday school pretty regularly because my mother was a teacher. Well, you know, I think this church has had a fairly significant impact. Kind of speaking of politics, this church has produced some of the real leaders, political leaders in Georgetown. The first one that I can recall was Senator James B. Morrison, he was a state senator, and he was a member of this church. And he then became a circuit court judge, and he retired, and of course now he's passed on, but he was a prominent citizen. And then Clayman Grimes, he was a member of this church, and he became a state senator. He was in the House of Representatives, I believe, ahead of that, and then became a state senator. And then I became, not that I'm that prominent, but I did. I became, I was elected to the House in 1967, yeah, so 1967, and I served 3 terms in the House. And then I served 16 years in the Senate. I was there for four terms. And then there have been other very prominent civic people that have been members of this church. The Boyd family was very prominent Geraldine Boyd was very prominent in this church and also in the community. And there have been a lot of other people that have, civic-minded, that have worked behind the scenes and so forth. And I think the church has had a lot good folks, you know, that have contributed to not only the community but to the state. Well, we've always had a wonderful Christmas here. We've had a number of different, you know, Christmas services and Christmas activities. And of course, we have things like, you know, at the end of the summer, or at the end of the beginning of the summer is what I'm trying to say, we have, you know, events, picnics and that sort of thing. And then when we start up in the fall, we sort of do the same thing. Easter is always a wonderful celebration here at this church. They really go out, you know, big time and have a lot of goings on. There's also some activities out at the little Plantersville church, Prince Frederick's. I haven't actually in the last 10 years really participated in that, but for a while, as a lay reader, we used to go out, in fact, we used to drive Mr. Henry Dessasaw Bull, who was a long-standing rector here, the rector that I grew up with, or he was here when I was growing up, and we used to drive him out to the Prince Frederick's in the evening for a evening service. He was probably one of the most outstanding persons that I've ever known. He would conduct a service here at Prince George at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, and then I think around 2 o'clock he would go to Pawleys Island and conduct a service at All Saints Walkamore, which was an Episcopal church, and then that night he would go to Plantersville and conduct a service at the old Prince Frederick's church. And there was also the Gun Episcopal Church, isn't that right?
It was the original Prince Frederick's.
Okay, that was the original Prince Frederick's church, and of course it's been decimated. They used to have Halloween people go out there and tear off parts of it. But anyway, parts of it are still standing. But that was and you know, this church has been very active, very vibrant, very good. Well, I was a member of the Young Person Service League, and he would recruit. You know, by that time he was getting somewhat elderly and didn't like to drive that much at night. So some of us would, you know, drive out or take him out, drive him to. It's about 15 miles, I guess, from Georgetown roughly to that location. It's on the way to Conway. You know, you go on 701 up 701 to, like you go into Conway, and about halfway up there, it's a little church. Well, the Christmas service, you know, the priests have all their regalia on, and of course the church is always decorated with poinsettias, red poinsettias, and so forth. And you know, the communion services, they bring out all the fine silverware, you know, the goblets and the pitchers and that kinds of stuff. And it's a beautiful service. It really is. And they have it also. They have now they have this 5 o'clock service, and they let the little children put on a pageant. And they all, you know, dressed up, and they, you know, and go up, and they have the baby Jesus and so forth, and you know, and they, two of them, but one of them will be Joseph, and the other will be Mary, and then they'll have the baby in the cradle, and it's a very nice service and very well attended. It's terrific attendance at that particular service. Now, I think later on, don't they have a later service? I'm not sure exactly what they do at that one. I haven't been to that one in some time, but we always attend the early one. We have grandchildren, and we've sort of tried to support what they were doing, and although they've all pretty much in high school now, we still go to the 9 o'clock service, which is a little bit more active, I guess, or not as quite as traditional, maybe is a better way to put it, service. And we have a little praise band that plays at the 9 o'clock service, and they've always participated in that. They, you know, been altar boys and girls and that kind of thing. And I have one now that's doing that, and also one that sings in the little praise band. I think they try to go the extra mile at Easter time, and of course everybody's dressed up, and all the congregation is dressed up, and it's a nice service. They had a picnic at that time, right?
Okay, so after the
Easter egg hunt. They had an Easter egg hunt and the picnic and that kind of thing at Easter time. Yes. I used to live catty-cornered across from the old rectory, which is just here on Queen Street. I live at the corner of Queen and High Market, and the rectory was just one house in. But and that's where Mr. Bull and all of the other rectors up until Paul Fina lived there. And then when Paul came, they had an opportunity to purchase this house right over across here, and they did that. So this rectory on Scriven Street, the newest rectory, they've got a very nice backyard area that borders onto the cemetery and so forth. And I think they have most of the picnics in that area, in the backyard there, and it's very nice. It's got, you know, shaded and that kind of stuff. There was a Mr. Daunt. I really didn't know Mr. Daunt very well, because I think he came after Mr. Bull. Isn't that right? He was from Scotland. I can't remember which. Anyway, he was a very nice gentleman, and but I really didn't know him because I was off at college. I was off in college and in the Air Force for about 10 years, from about 1953 until, well, 1963, thereabouts. So during that period, of course, I was living elsewhere and didn't really. And then there was Melvin Hyman. I think he was probably a couple of ones. Mr. Crudson, did Mr. Crudson come next? And then I think Melvin Hyman came next. And then after him, Holly Hollerith came next, and he's now a bishop in Virginia, or I believe he is. And then Paul, is that right? I think Paul Fina, who is our current rector. I really liked Melvin Hyman. We were about the same age, and we hit it off well. I thought he did a good job. And Holly Hollerith, he was a little bit younger than I was, but he was very nice. And of course, Paul Fina's doing a wonderful job. So I think all those, and Mr. Crudson, he was, you know, just a very, very nice. We've been very fortunate that we've had, everybody has been well liked and well received and done a good job. The women run the church, and I don't say that, I mean, that's wonderful. And if it wasn't for the women, this church, or probably any church, would not be as successful as it is, because they see to all the details. I know my wife, I mean, she's reasonably active, or was reasonably active. She's kind of a little bit older now and hadn't gotten quite as, but I mean, you know, like the altar guild and plantation tours, absolutely. That is a major event. Our women have put on the plantation tours for
67 years.
67 years. My mother was a big plantation tour worker, and also I might tell you that my mother and a Mrs. Richardson, who was the mother of my best friend Dawn Richardson, who was a successful attorney in Columbia, and probably several others that I just can't think of, they were the first cookbook folks. They came out with the idea of a Prince George cookbook, and it went over great, and then I think it sort of was dormant for a while, And then these ladies here, the past, 5 or 6, 7 years, something like about 5 years, they picked it up and they have done just an outstanding job with it. I mean, they've really, duded it up. I mean, it's got all kinds of stuff in it now, and I think they've done well, and they have donated a great portion of it to the church and to outreach as well, I think, that kind of thing. So they've done a good job. I would say that the outstanding parishioners have been the women of the church, and we've got some great men too, but the women really run the show. Oh Lord, I've seen a lot. Physical changes. It's an old church, and it takes a lot of money to maintain it. I remember back when there was pews on the right and left windows. They used to run all the way to the wall, but I don't remember which rector it was that decided they wanted to turn those and have an open area on both sides as it is now. And there was the biggest fight you ever saw. Some didn't want to do it, but the rector won out, and of course now it's quieted down. I guess the biggest change that I've seen is the acquisition of this additional property, which has been good. The parish house, of course, was there when I was a child, and the acquisition of this building, which is the old jail, library, later library, and then the acquisition of the new rectory, and I guess those are the biggest changes. I might add, I wrote a little book about a murder in Georgetown that has some history about our church. It happened right down here on the end of Scriven Street. Mm-hmm. In fact, they had to walk right by at that time. This was, I think, the jail probably. It was back in about in the early 50s. And the woman had been to the theater, and she walked right by this building and walked right on down. And Carnes Court is just on Duke Street right there at the corner of Duke and Scriven Street, and that's where it's an apartment building, that's where she was going. And she was attacked and thrown over the wall of the brick wall and dragged into the basement of the parish house. Mm-hmm. And that's where they found her. Of course, she had been murdered. And it was a big to-do, and they caught the guy that they believed did it, and he suffered the consequences. Mm-hmm. But that was another, I'll never forget that. And I remember we used to come to the parish house for, for church events, and if it was at night, they would tell you give you 50 cents if you'd run around. I never would do it. I was scared to do it. So anyway, but it was a tension in the town at that time. People were riding around with guns in the cars and all that kind of stuff. My father ran a clothing business at the corner of King and Front Street, right across from the old post office. Okay. And of course, since then, the old store that he had was torn down, and a A&P supermarket was built there, and then they built his a brick store right where the lanes of the Wells Fargo Bank are. So every time I ride through there, I used to work at my father's store, and so I kind of have, when I'm sitting there, I kind of have memories of sweeping that place out. And as I say, it was right across Georgetown, the Front Street. Of course, there's been a lot of modernization or maintenance, or what the right word is, of the businesses, but it really, I don't think it's really changed that much, you know, until this terrible fire, this in 2013. Yeah. Now they've painted them up, and modernized them, and this, that, and the other. But basically, you know, what was there when I was growing up is still, you know, there, with the exception of that 700 block of Front Street that you know, that right. Unfortunately burned. But the whole, you know, the whole community has grown, and I think, you know, we've got a very vibrant community. Some people might disagree with that, but I think we've, you know, we've come a long way. We had a period of time there, in fact it wasn't too long after I came back, that a lot of the stores on Front Street were vacant. You know, the shopping centers came, and Walmart came, and of course it's pretty hard for small businesses to compete against Walmart, so they kind of went under. But now it seems like we've got a lot of nice restaurants. The artsy crowd is in there, the painting and this, that, and the other, you know, and those kind of things. We don't have a whole lot of clothing. We still have some, but not nearly as many as we did at one time. But maybe they're coming back too, you know. But it's now a little bit more specialized area, and I think most of the merchants seem to be doing pretty good. I went to elementary school at Georgetown School, the old, it's now called Winyah Auditorium. It's the old school. That's where I went to school. And then my father went in the Navy during the Second World War, and I went to the second grade down in Miami, Florida, down for I think the second and the third grade. And then we came back, and again I got in the same school. Then I went to Winyah High School, that's W-I-N-Y-A-H, and unfortunately when one of my daughters was either a junior or senior, it burned. So then they built the new Georgetown High School. But anyway, I graduated from Winyah High School in 1953, and I went to the University of South Carolina, and I graduated in 1957. But at that time, they would allow you to go on to law school your senior year in college. You could go to your freshman year in law school. They won't let you do that anymore. So I graduated from law school in 1959. So my senior year at Carolina was my freshman year at USC Law School. And then from there, I had gone through the Air Force ROTC, and I was commissioned at that time. And I went, when I had to serve 3 years in the Air Force, which I did in the Judge Advocate. My first assignment was Goose Air Force Base, Labrador. And I spent 15 glorious freezing months there. And then I came back to Shaw Air Force Base and spent the rest of my time there. And then I practiced law with a firm in Columbia, McKay, Black, and Walker, who is no longer in existence, but they've all died except Julius McKay. And then I got an opportunity to come back home, and I have practiced law here in Georgetown County ever since. Okay. Still practicing.
Still practicing.
Well, let's see, I started here in 62, 72, 82, 92, 2002, 2012, 13, 14, that's 52 years. I'm a defense lawyer, and I represent several hospitals, in hospital malpractice cases where they sue the hospital and that kind of thing. The men's club, some years back, used to have an auction, and they'd members of the parish would bring all kinds of, you know, knick-knack and stuff, and then they would, you know, have a silent auction, and then they'd also have a regular, you know, auction on them. And they used to raise money that way. I've got 3 daughters. We didn't have any luck with the boys. My oldest daughter, she ran a dress shop here for a number of years, and then she retired from that, and she married a pharmacist, and he runs the medicine shop pharmacy here in Georgetown, and she kind of is the managing, she does kind of the book work. And then I have my second daughter is Julie, and the first one is Amy. I mean, excuse me, is Beth. Okay. And the second one is Julie, and she's a CPA, and she's the CFO, I guess, of hospice here in the Tidelands Hospice, and she has 3 children, and they're doing fine. And then my third daughter was sort of a surprise, and she is, let's see, 15 years younger than the second daughter. Okay. And she's got 2 little boys. She lives in Columbia, and she's a nurse, and she works for a doctor who was originally from Georgetown, Stan Juck. He's a cardiologist in Columbia, and Amy works for him.